I first became aware of Norma Curry's story in 2004, just before the Iraq War, when her book Forbidden Love was in the top 10 of all books selling in Australia. However, I didn't get passionate to tell Norma's story until Malcolm Knox's article exposing her as a hoax came out in August 2004. That's when I really got interested. I thought, what kind of woman is so brilliant that while on the run from the FBI for $1 million worth of fraud, she can reinvent herself as a best-selling author of a true story, and not only that, get away with it on the international stage, convince publishers, lawyers, media people, journalists, everyone that she's telling the truth. That's when I thought, I've got to make a film about this woman. I've got to know who she is.
There were many and varied challenges in producing a film about a con artist. Norma is very adept at walling people off and creating little barriers where if you talk to that person, something catastrophic will happen. So it made it very difficult to get a clear picture of what was going on. As Norma says herself, it's all smoke and mirrors. Well, it was very much a case of smoke and mirrors for us in trying to schedule it, in trying to work out financially whether we were being taken for a ride, whether people would turn up, whether Norma would even get to Jordan when we took her to Jordan, whether terrorists were going to jump out of pot plants and blow everybody up.
We hired her a bodyguard, we tinted the windows, we hired security to stop us being blown up by terrorists that Norma had told us were going to put a fatwa on her head. We hired expensive equipment from London. We did all these things to make sure that Norma could prove her story, and she didn't. That was a very big turning point for me, because I realised that in fact, even though I'd set out to make a film to prove that Norma was right, I was ending up making a film about a con artist. My relationship with Norma Curry is now 2.5 years long, and it feels like the best and worst of any marriage, in a sense. I've gone from being a Norma convert to a Norma convictim to someone else entirely at the end of the day. And of course, I still adore Norma and always will. Norma Curry to me is someone who likes playing a game, and that's what makes her such fun to hang out with. Everything's a game for her. She's a kind of practical joker on a very big amoral scale. You know, she just can't resist it. If there's a chance to take someone for a ride, she'll do it. I got the sense very early on that Norma was taking on this film kind of like to play a game. It was like, yeah, throw whatever you want at me, I'm going to have a comeback. And she did.
Anna went from being very sceptical about who Norma was and telling the crew to lock their equipment away and, you know, being very cautious about the whole thing, to ringing me saying, please, can't I give her some money? She's fantastic. Can't I donate to the cause? Can't we find a little bit of money? And I was at the point where I'd say, no, Anna, no. And I'd get on the phone to the cinematographer, Catherine Millis, and say, what is going on? And it was very clear early on that Anna had a big case of Stockholm Syndrome.
I couldn't marry in my mind the portrait that I was being given by these very well-respected practitioners in media and the law, etc., with the woman that I knew. And in fact, the only time that I ever saw that side of Norma, the scheming, manipulative, so-called con artist side, was when she sent us a tape halfway through the edit. There is a tape in the film where Norma actually is gloating to her so-called bodyguard, Jeremy, that she's ripped us off. I rang Norma up and I said, Norma, you know, can we use this tape? It's great. And she giggled and said, yeah, sure, why not? And I said, do you realise that I can no longer make a film proving that Dahlia existed? And she giggled again and said, yeah, I made it pretty hard for you, didn't I?
And there were certain things along the way in the trip to Jordan where she had to go and get a disguise. And the disguise, you know, was this very elaborate hairdo. You know, we said, of course, you know, we understand it's difficult for your safety and security. We'll pay for this disguise, which cost the production $500 US. When Norma turned up in Jordan, there were 3 tiny blonde streaks that, to me, I couldn't tell any difference at all. And then, of course, there was the fantastical tale of the security guard, which cost us $6,000 US. He turned up in downtown Jordan, a very buff, very handsome young man in his 20s. Jokingly, I was saying in my role of cynical producer, I bet it's her boyfriend. And the payoff for this story is that Jeremy's main claim to fame as a security guard was as a bouncer at a local country club in downtown Chicago.
Norma's a brilliant poker player, let's face it. However, Norma, like anyone, has tells. If you watch the film, you'll see them yourself, and there are 3. When Norma Curry is telling a porky pie or a lie, her eyes tend to glaze over. Unlike most people, when they're telling a story, they'll look up, they'll look around, they'll recall. Norma does the opposite. Her eyes glaze over, she doesn't blink, and she looks straight down the barrel, and her voice goes flat, almost like she's reciting something by rote, like a performance. Her second tell is when Norma's telling a lie, she tends to put her hands together and go like this. She does a lot of hand movement, and this is a very particular one. The third tell Norma Curry has is an emotional one. When she's confronted and she can't think of a lie to get herself out or a story that's going to save the day, the next thing she'll do is either get very angry with you or burst into tears. And either of those approaches immediately make me, as the questioner, pull back and let her go, rather than accuse her of lying. Did I con Norma? Once. One thing you have to be if you're going to be a good liar is have a good memory. And I think in me as a filmmaker, Norma met her match, because unlike most people she cons on a daily basis, I've got rushes. I've got rushes proving that she's lying at certain points. She finally said, okay, I will tell you who the real Dahlia is. The real Dahlia is a woman called Garda Abed, who was killed in August 2001. Well, all I had to do was go back into the rushes, and I realised Garda couldn't possibly be the real Dahlia because the book was written before August 2001. So the moment when I decided I probably had to be less than honest with Norma was when I realised I had to make her believe that I thought Dahlia was Garda, so I could catch her out on camera and say Garda wasn't Dahlia, was she? That was the only time that I conned Norma Curry. The marriage between filmmaker and con artist is a marriage made in heaven, because both of us use a million tiny deceits to manipulate the way people think and feel. And both of us are in the business of making illusions real. So in filming Norma Curry, I just had this beautiful canvas for all of these tricks of the trade that as a filmmaker I adore. CGI sleights of hand, making the audience not quite sure what they're watching, disappearing backdrops. In other words, what the film does to the viewer is what Norma does to her subjects. And so creatively, really, the film was always going to be artificial and designed and slick and deceptive. And I really think that if the audience walks out of this film not trusting the filmmaker, that's brilliant. They shouldn't trust the filmmaker. Trust no one. That's the message of Forbidden Lies. Structurally, what we decided to do very early on was structure Forbidden Lies not like a documentary, but like a thriller. And it wasn't hard because, frankly, we had the cast of a thriller. The only difference was they weren't actors, they were real people. We've just shown Norma Curry this film in Chicago. She's now living in Chicago in a satellite suburb. She's selling car insurance while studying night school to become a human rights lawyer. She watched the film very bravely, I thought. She took it on the chin. She was remarkably, it seems to me, unaffected emotionally by it.
I certainly know that I was very concerned about screening it to Norma, certainly being in the same room as Norma while it was being screened. I still don't know that we actually ever got to the bottom of why Norma does what Norma does. I don't know that Norma knows what Norma does. But put it this way, Norma really likes the film. So if she's happy, I'm happy.
When people go to see Forbidden Lies, I'm very much hoping that they walk out of this film with more questions than they have answers. The whole point of this film is that there is no absolute truth. Do we blame Norma Curry, or do we blame the system that currently allows hoax authors like her to thrive? Because let's face it, as Norma Curry says herself, everyone is spinning. How far would you go? How far would you go to spin? How far would you go if you were deceived? And how often do you believe what you're told, and why?